lot of people are calling for action, and we want this time to be different. I'm supporting universal background check legislation to make sure every gun transfer is run through the NICS. I also support raising the minimum age. If an 18-year-old and 19-year-old can't buy a handgun, oh, and by the way, they also can't buy a beer at a restaurant, why can they buy these powerful long guns that are capable of inflicting so much damage as we saw at Marjory Stoneman Douglas last week?
The horrific rampage in Florida last week bringing the heated gun control debate back into the headlines. A new poll taken right after the massacre shows that among the people surveyed, an overwhelming majority think Congress is not doing enough to prevent such mass shootings. Joining me now, Lisa Booth, senior fellow at Independent Women's Voice, and Leslie Marshall is syndicated radio host, both Fox News contributors, and they join us now. Here we are in the middle of this debate again. And Lisa, we are hearing from some Republicans, including the president, some willingness to make at least small changes to gun laws in this country.
Well, I think what they're looking at is the bill introduced by Senator Cornyn, which was in response to the Texas church shooting, where we had the failure by the Air Force to submit information to the existing NICS database that would have prevented that individual from obtaining a gun, because there is a breakdown within the NICS database, but that's also the failure of the Air Force for submitting that information. We also saw with the Charleston church shooting as well, there was a failure with the submitting of information to the NICS database. So that's a big concern. But I think the broader question here, we've seen the breakdown of government, the breakdown of the system, particularly in the shooting with Florida. Police were at the home of this individual 39 times. Right. The FBI was alerted to twice. A Florida Mental Health Institute looked at this individual, yet he still walked free. So how do we prevent that from happening?
It does seem, Leslie, that the conversation goes so firmly to gun control and the debate there, rather than looking all the things that led up to this horrible tragedy down in Parkland, Florida, including self-policing. This community said there are red flags about this individual. The FBI was alerted. They dropped the ball. But so quickly, the conversation is centered around guns.
But quite frankly, without the gun and the type of gun, he could not have done that amount of damage. And gun control is not just about the gun. It is a multifaceted problem that includes mental illness, that includes law enforcement, that includes the type of weapon, that includes the age of the individual. Remember that even if the FBI had responded to this individual, it wouldn't have prevented him from legally obtaining a gun and this type of gun. So it is a much bigger issue. And the fact that Republicans are actually sounding very similar to Democrats on this issue after this latest heinous massacre in our nation just shows, and the polls show, that Americans are overwhelmingly in favor of universal background checks. We need to not put guns into the hand of the mentally ill, as the president had rolled back what President Obama had originally put in place in the last administration, and that people are looking more not maybe toward politics, but what's in the best interest for our children in the future.
I think
and that's
those listening to you
right.
would be very quick to point out that somebody who wanted to inflict that type of harm to that many people could carry it out with something other than a gun. It happened recently right here in New York City with an individual using a truck to mow down people on a jogging path. So those who want to do harm, certainly you can make the case, will do harm some way that they can get a hold of. Lisa, that being said, we have now a president that's showing a willingness to do something here. How far is he and Republicans willing to go?
Well, I think the broader question is anything being discussed now? Would any of those things have prevented previous mass shootings and prevent future mass shootings? And I think that's the broader question. Of course, there is a desire for change. Not a single person in this country wants to see, such horrific incidents happening. But the bigger question and the most important question is what would actually prevent these tragedies from happening. I think that's the problem, and that's the confusion, and that's the reason why we haven't found, or Congress has not found, a solution to this bigger problem. But I also think this conversation has to be approached from a place of honesty. And Sandra, as you pointed out, what Leslie said is categorically untrue. We looked at the Virginia Tech shooting. I went to Virginia. I'm from Virginia. I had friends from high school that went to Virginia Tech. At the time, he had 2 handguns and killed 32 people. You look at Nice, France, a guy with a truck killed 96 people. So what she said about the fact that is that specific AR-15 gun that was enabled this guy to kill that many people is just false. So I also think that this conversation really has to be approached with honesty and with facts.
Well, their emotions are
and not
certainly running
demagoguery
high right now. And Leslie, I'll run this by you. This Washington Post poll we've been citing this morning. Here's another one that asks, do you think this event could or could not have been prevented by more effective mental health screening and treatment? 77% say yes, it could have, Leslie. So where's the conversation about that?
Well, there should be a conversation about that. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing from the president and Republicans is they want to keep cutting funding, whether it's a package in Social Security or Medicare for those that have a mental illness in this country. In addition to that, how come we are allowing those with mental illness in this country to have an easier time to access a weapon? Again,
well, we'll
multifaceted. You take care of the problem and you prevent the access to the weapon.
It was one of the first things he tweeted out in response, and his verbal response to this attack. It was one of the first things that he mentioned, and the White House said, we'll see what the president, how he moves forward with all of this. It's a heated debate that's happening across the country right now. Thanks to both of you, Leslie and Lisa.
Thank you, Sandra.
In a moment.